So recently I went through a so-called greatest video game of all time test on a Korean site called Piku, where you're given 512 games from across decades and genres, and you're forced to pick a winner in a random 1 versus 1 matchups until only one game remains. No tiers, no ties, no genre separation, just brutal elimination. Early rounds are easy. You pick what you've played or what you haven't. You pick something that at least feels like a video game or something that's more of an experience. You go on vibes, familiarity, maybe even laziness. Nothing too deep. But as the test goes on, something interesting happens. The randomization starts forcing collisions that you would never voluntarily compare. Strategy games against RPGs, system-heavy sandboxes against tightly scripted narratives, old, janky classics against modern, polished releases. Games you love for totally different reasons suddenly have to compete under the same rule. One survives, one dies. And that's where the test stops being a recreational activity and starts becoming genuinely uncomfortable. In a good way. You're no longer picking based on genre loyalty or nostalgia. You can't say they're both great. You can't defer the question. You have to articulate why one game deserves to go further than another. And over hundreds of these choices, patterns start to form. Certain values survive pressure, others don't. Some games reveal that they're strong in isolation but fragile in comparison. I want to walk you through the most interesting clashes from that test. The ones where I actually had to stop, think and argue with myself, and sometimes even surprise myself. These are the moments where the question stopped being what do I like more and became what does greatness in a video game actually mean? I will also add images and supporting media from time to time to get my points across. Do take into account this video will contain spoilers, so if you see a game you haven't played but are interested in, skip that section. I think you will be entertained. Before we begin, please note that everything stated in this video is not merely an opinion, but the final, immutable truth of the universe, certified retroactively and prospectively. Any resemblance to subjectivity is a clerical error. I am not sharing thoughts or starting a discussion. I am issuing binding epistemological rulings in my capacity as the supreme adjunct core legislator of knowing things. Disagreement is permitted only as performance art exercise and will be graded accordingly. Facts will be updated to match what I say, not the other way around. And reality has been notified in advance. By continuing to watch, you acknowledge that you are not forming your own opinions but successfully remembering conclusions you were always meant to have. Heroes of Might and Magic 3 vs Mass Effect. I'm going to start, and mostly stay, with Mass Effect. Because despite its highs, and they are real, the lows eclipse them. And that's not me denying the brilliance. It's me saying that brilliance doesn't make up for the structural problems that keep pulling the experience out from under me. This isn't spite. It's that Mass Effect consistently feels shallow and constrained, despite how ambitious it wants to be. And that feeling carries across the trilogy for me. Very much in Mass Effect 3, a bit less in Mass Effect 2, but it's always there. The core problem is a paradox the game is built on. Mass Effect consistently signals vastness. Galaxies spanning politics, multiple alien races, dense codex entries, huge existential stakes. But then it makes me move through narrow channels. I'm in endless corridors. I'm in funneled combat spaces. I'm in big, branching decisions that later collapse into cameos, emails, or cosmetic changes. The game wants to sell me a huge, living space of possibility, but it plays like a tightly controlled tunnel. Not just in level design, but in the gameplay, the role-playing, and the narrative. The writing is a big reason it lands that way. It leans hard on over-literal exposition. It keeps explaining itself. It keeps telling me what things are instead of letting them exist through subtext, implication, or lived detail. I know some people love that clarity and density, and that's great. But for me, it turns the world into a lecture. It creates artificiality instead of intimacy. and the emotional moments that are there, which can be genuinely strong, have to fight uphill through all that noise. Then there's the role-playing, and for an RPG, that's kind of the point. Here, it mostly boils down to slight, tonal variations of the same galactic hero, kind hero, charming trickster hero, or an asshole hero. That's not a meaningful identity space, that's an attitude selection. It feels like a performance of agency rather than actual agency, because no matter how I answer, I'm still the same hero-shaped key being guided toward the same lock. Even when choices exist, they rarely matter in lasting ways. And across the trilogy, a lot of them eventually just flow back into the same river. Long-term continuity gets advertised, but much of it feels like the illusion of permanence. What makes this critique especially clean is that the storytelling and gameplay feel just as linear as the level design. The corridors aren't just architecture, they're philosophy. The game funnels me spatially, it funnels me mechanically, and it funnels me narratively. It can shout branching all at once. Most of the time, I can still feel the rails. And underneath all of that, the mismatch is actually simple. Mass Effect prioritizes bombastic, galaxy-saving spectacle and dense lore over the kind of storytelling I personally care about the most. Smaller, more grounded stories with real emotional weight and genuine moral messiness. Those moments do exist in the series, and when they show up, they're excellent. But they aren't the dominant mode. Mass Effect is a heroic opera. I tend to prefer grim, grounded drama, where reasons to care are errant, and the world feels morally dirty and human scale. So the series never fully clicked with me, even though I can absolutely see why it resonates so strongly with others. And then there's Heroes of Might and Magic 3. It doesn't promise cinematic roleplay or branching epics. It's honest about what it is, and it delivers exactly that. A timeless strategy artifact, endlessly replayable, immediately readable, rich in faction identity, mechanically impressive. Its depth comes from systems and replay, not from grand narrative promises that eventually collapse back into the same corridor. Heroes 3 wins here. Age of Empires 3 vs Tyranny. This clash sits on two interesting friction points: gameplay and maturity. One of these games gets under the skin because it plays well, the other gets under the skin because it treats its world and its themes like they matter. And the annoying part is that those strengths don't line up in the same place. First of all, the biggest praise I'll give to Tyranny is that it's actually an RPG. Dialogue, quests, branching narratives, the whole thing. And the character creation is one of the coolest bits I've seen, because it isn't the classical pick your class, pick your face, distribute skill points, it's the conquest mechanic. Overseeing the map, helping your overlord conquer lands, making choices that later have an impact. It's character creation through biography, and that biography actually bites into the present. Super cool. Never seen anything like this, and for this alone, Tyranny gets a super big praise. Even before the game truly begins, Tyranny feels mature. Not merely because it's dark or edgy, but because it lets you live with a past you participated in. It doesn't just hand you a backstory, it makes you complicit in it, including committing atrocities. It's built like it expects attention and memory, like it expects you to care about what you did and what it means. When it works, it feels like the game is talking to an adult. And then the friction point shows up, the gameplay. When I was playing Tyranny, I had to often force myself to play it. I wanted to know what happens next, where the game leads me, but the act of playing, the combat, navigating dungeons, clearing areas, didn't really click for me. That's my complaint with isometric RPGs in general. The story pulls you forward, but the play part feels like a chore. It's not as bad as some other cases, but I still felt that, come on, just get through this section pressure. And I'm going to pick Age of Empires 3 here because it excels exactly where Tyranny falters. Age of Empires 3 is one of the greatest strategy games of all time. Civilizations actually differ from one another. In Age of Empires 2, picking Byzantines versus Vikings, apart from the visual style, didn't really feel much different. In Age of Empires 3, Japan feels very much different from England, Ottomans or Aztecs. And then the home city mechanic. The deck system turns a match into something you author before it even starts. You don't begin every game with the same rigid rule set. You prepare. Aggressive, rush, treaty, tailor it to your playstyle. Even the same civilization can become a different creature depending on deck composition. England with one deck is not England with another deck. That's replayability that isn't just do the same thing again, it's do something else with the same pieces. The revolution mechanic is very cool, especially for Mexico or France. Trading posts, natives, map-specific alliances. Amazing. Building a trading post with one tribe and getting units that don't cost population space is exactly that kind of rule bending that makes strategy sing, because it opens doors you can only see once you understand the constraints. Even the definitive edition is great, and this is where the maturity friction point flips, because definitive edition does something that Tyranny at its best refuses to do. It treats you like you can't be trusted with uncomfortable material. I don't like some sensitivity reason changes. Renaming the colonial era to commerce era, renaming plantation to estate. And the most jarring example, rewriting a campaign where you initially fight Native Americans, but later you join their side and fight against Custer. In the remaster, they removed that and replaced them with bandits and gunslingers. I'm not fond of this change. Feels like instead of letting me chew my own food, a mama bird did it for me and now expects me to open the mouth so she can vomit it inside so I can swallow without chewing. So yes, Tyranny wins on maturity. It has more backbone. It can feel like it expects an adult in the chair. But here's the part that decides the clash anyway. I still come back to Age of Empires 3. Because the thing I'm doing most of the time isn't being respected by the narrative, it's playing the game. And Age of Empires 3 plays better. Systems level play, civilization asymmetry, deck building, shipments, politicians, revolutions, trading posts, natives, map leverage, keeps producing decisions that feel sharp and alive. It gives me more ways to play, more ways to express a style, more ways to master something and make it mine. Tyranny can impress me, even move me, and still feel like a chore. Age of Empires 3 can occasionally annoy me with that baby bird nonsense, and still feel like a feast I want to keep eating. So I'll grant the victory to a game that sometimes treats me like I can't chew my own food, simply because it excels at gameplay. For a better video game, excellence in systems level play outweighs maturity, or even the courtesy of treating the player like an adult. Sorry Tyranny, you're great, but sadly you go away here. Witcher 3 or Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. I think that even people who liked Pathfinder won't object to my choice, which is Witcher 3 here. But I ain't discarding it so easily. I want to address a specific group that are so-called RPG purists, who may think that Witcher 3 is a shallow pseudo-RPG. To this I will say, maybe. To every argument that claims Witcher 3 is not a true RPG, I'm willing to subscribe to in advance. But for me, even though I love classic RPGs, Pathfinder collapses in the first 20 minutes when I play it. I'm talking about first impressions, vibe and trust. The rejection starts the moment the story announces its stakes and assigns me my role. When I launch the game, the first thing I see is the demons, some cosmic level motherfuckers threatening the universe. And surprise surprise, you are some kind of chosen one, special one, unique one, and it appears that it is up to you to change the destiny of the universe. The first companion you encounter in the game is African woman. Paladin, dressed in high fantasy steel plate armor that even Holy Roman Emperors would not wear. Seeing this character, players get two reactions. First one, okay, cool, so what? The second one rolls their eyes. I am the second one. After playing for hours longer, I eventually close the game. I Google and take a look at how other companions look like. And I roll my eyes some more. Of course, I'm making a prediction and forecasting on what kind of experience I'm going to get. And I might be wrong. It may be, one of the greatest classic RPGs of all time, with greatest dialogues comparable to Ulysses, etc, etc, etc. But my gut feeling tells me, no, this is not the kind of immersive experience I want to get involved with. So yes, it is my personal bias that prevents me from even letting myself to enjoy the game. I draw a clear no here. Black female paladin with dreadlocks in a steel plate armor with a greatsword whose hilt is shaped like a cross is an immersion shattering moment for me. It feels anachronistic to me, except the problem is not anachronism. Perhaps register mismatch would be a better word. It's not anachronistic in a sense that it's not like an AK-47 or a rocket launcher in a fantasy setting, which, if executed right, doesn't mean immediately like it's something wrong. Categorically, these are different things, but the immersion-breaking feeling I get is equally the same. Whether I play Lord of the Rings game where Gandalf blasts orcs with a machine gun, or see black female paladin. Machine gun implies technological progress where everything else, huts, swords, no factories, signals it is not possible. Black female paladin implies social progress where everything else, feudal institutions, superstition, low education, signals it is not possible either. It is not technological anachronism, it is social anachronism. You could correct me here, saying that immersion is subjective. True, ultimately immersion is about how well the player can deceive himself into believing the fantasy he enters is real. Yet we still apply the trait of immersive as a valid factor for evaluating video games. And despite the nature of subjectivity of immersion, we can still comparably evaluate games as more immersive or less immersive. More so, players praise immersion while the developers advertise immersion. In any case, you may find the game more virtuous, more moral, more representative, more woke, more based, whatever. But these are all different axes separate from immersion. Casting an African woman as a paladin is not purely cosmetic decision because in the current cultural and production context, it functions as a signal rather than a neutral aesthetic variation. It does not inherently mean conspiracy, yet it nevertheless immediately communicates something about the author's presuppositions. For some players, this signals that the world's ethnic and cultural map is likely to be intentionally flattened or de-emphasized, less a product of in-world history, migration, climate, conquest, and more of a reflection of modern casting ethics applied uniformly across the setting. This mirrors the broader attempts to reduce the anxieties caused by the third demographic transition, by softening the perception that history and fantasy already has and always had diversity, and your ethnically motivated expectations are nonsense and should be weeded out as soon as possible. Fantasy has black paladins. Historical films have prescriptive history over descriptive history. You could argue that I am immediately assuming the worst bad faith reasoning instead of lazy world building or lack of historical insight. No, it's not the same as making a game about Mongols, whether real or fictionalized, and giving them samurai armor and weapons. In this case, it is indeed world builders being lazy or historically illiterate. Casting black character as a paladin is not the same and is more sensitive and real. Paladin is a European historical concept. Steel plate armor, at least in how it is commonly presented in media and fantasy, is a European invention that didn't go beyond Europe until it was replaced by gunpowder warfare motivated armors, like coats. Even if we are used to seeing paladins as those who smite evil, our subconscious still has presuppositions about what they should look like. Black Paladin is not an innocent ambiguity, it's a signal-bearing decision. The issue then is not the presence of a black character, but that her placement in a role strongly coded by pseudo-European, feudal, religious and martial traditions can read as an authorial declaration that symbolic representation outweighs coherence, thereby shaping expectations about tone, dialogue, narrative constraints, and the seriousness with which the world's internal logic will be maintained. With games like those, where ethnicities are purely cosmetic, it also signals immaturity in deciding that racism or xenophobia does not exist in the fantasy world depicted, which further ruins my immersion. For me, it's easier to believe in worlds with prejudice than those with egalitarian cosmopolitanism. Absence of social injustices is less believable than dragons or necromancers. A dragon, despite being physically impossible, is ontologically economical. It asks the audience to accept one explicit exception to reality: dragons exist, and then proceeds to behave consistently with that exception. Its existence requires no further silent assumptions about how people think, organize, or compete. It simply adds a new danger to an otherwise familiar human world. By contrast, a frictionless egalitarian cosmopolitan society, though theoretically achievable, is ontologically expensive. It presupposes the quiet resolution of dozens of historical persistent social dynamics: tribalism, status anxiety, inherited grievance, boundary maintenance. Occam's razor favors the dragon not because it is realistic, but because it concentrates its unreality into a single rule-bound premise, whereas the utopia distributes improbability everywhere, while pretending nothing exceptional has occurred. And now The Witcher 3. Witcher has black characters, such as Ophir merchants, that make perfect sense in the universe they are in, and ignore the third demographic transition related anxieties and just commit to the immersion and world building more fully. Ophir are geographically marked, culturally marked, socially positioned, and narratively asymmetric. Crucially, difference is preserved, not dissolved. The third demographic transition adds pressure because it makes native foreign distinctions morally charged in the present. Worlds that maintain clear native identities risk being read as exclusionary. Worlds that emphasize migration and difference risk being read as political. So many productions preemptively neutralize the issue by universalizing representation, minimizing ethnocultural specificity and avoiding who belongs where questions altogether. At best, this is a toothless risk avoidance. At worst, this is unwelcome ideological coloring. I denounce both without deciding on a monocausal explanation. I don't need to prove intent. The final output is what breaks immersion for me. Ophir merchants demonstrate that diversity is not the issue. Foreigners are not the issue. Race is not the issue. The issue is whether difference is allowed to remain structurally meaningful. When difference has geography, culture, and consequence, immersion deepens. When difference is symbolic but costless, immersion fractures for a certain player. Different players have different thresholds. Some feel this when a fantasy character sounds like a contemporary Californian. Others feel it when a setting uses slang that evokes Reddit energy. Others don't care at all. Seeing a black paladin pollutes my experience like seeing Ryan Gosling play Shaka Zulu or Idris Elba play Jan Sobieski in non-existent historical epics. And that loops back to why I can still pick Witcher 3 while conceding it may not satisfy purists. The Witcher 3 wins not because it is the best RPG out there, but because it satisfies my immersion criteria: consistent tone, grounded characterization, and a world that doesn't signal a modern register I don't trust. Oh wow, that's an interesting pick. Gothic 3 versus Heroes of Might and Magic 4. These aren't just two games to compare like normal titles, because both have that franchise killer reputation hanging off them. Like they're historical turning points and scapegoats instead of simply releases in a series. The funny part is they even share weird industry parallels. Studios collapsing, rights changing hands, the whole messy chain of ownership and continuity falling apart around them. It's easier to people to point at a title and spit, "This one did it," than to admit how much it was baked into the circumstances. And before anything else, I'll do the obvious equalizer. Gothic 3 has masterpiece music. Heroes 4 has masterpiece music. That matters to me more than it probably should, because music is proof there's soul in there, ambition, seriousness. It's not soulless trash versus something great. It's two flawed works with real greatness inside them. If I picked purely on vibes, Gothic 3 would win. Back then, it was an unprecedented experience. That early era promise of a seamless open world, no loading screens, the feeling the map is one connected place, and not just a set of rooms linked together. And the world actually changes as you travel. Snowy mountains, then desert, then something else. Those contrasts hit hard when you're experiencing them for the first time. Even with all its flaws, it's still a very special game for me. But when I think about why people call it a franchise killer, I get it more with Gothic 3 than with Heroes 4. Gothic 3 failure mode was technical and immediate. Buggy launch, instability, performance issues. Even the gameplay has turned from a classical RPG to something more resembling an MMO. The fact that it was being patched by the community for like 10-15 years says everything. That's a judgment and a compliment at the same time. It implies it shipped in a state that needed a long-term unpaid rescue operation, but it also implies there was something worth rescuing. A game doesn't get that kind of community labor unless it has a compelling core fantasy, and even now you check those patch notes and they're updated super recently. It became a community-managed relic, beloved but permanently branded by its broken birth. Heroes 4, on the other hand, is less deserving of the hate it gets. It's not that it's perfect, it's that the outrage is disproportionate to the actual sins. Gothic 3 was broken and a flawed RPG. Heroes 4 changed, and fandoms treat change like betrayal. Heroes 4 fault is being too ambitious, being too innovative, and then piling on some odd visual and aesthetic decisions. Shift from the familiar look to that pseudo 3D, pseudo isometric style. And the towns look bad. In Heroes 3 and even Heroes 5, the towns look like a painting. They look amazing. The town screens in Heroes 4, let's be honest, they look like shit. Scattered buildings clustered on some blurry, incomprehensive ghoul texture. And the monsters kinda look deformed, jarring, but not in an intentional way. So yeah, I can understand the hate, but I also think people missed what it was doing. Some of the mechanics everyone acted like they were unforgivable later got used in Heroes 5. The caravan mechanic, gameplay-wise, is cool. And I really like the heroes as a unit who is present on the battlefield, who fights, who can die, who can cast spells, drink potions. It adds an entirely new dimension of RPG into the game. It stops being the hero is a bundle of modifiers who can occasionally cast a spell. It changes the emotional texture of battles. And playing it like a party-based RPG where you have an army of uber-leveled heroes fighting hundreds of dragons and titans, delicious. Gameplay-wise, I wouldn't say it's an improvement over Heroes 3, but it's a welcome and enjoyable alternative. It's not an improved Heroes 3, it's an alternative Heroes 3, even though it's an inferior Heroes 3. That's reactive, but that's exactly how fans look at it. Being in the shadow of a great game is a nasty thing, because people don't judge what they have in front of them, they judge the absence of what they wanted repeated. On the story, I will not elaborate now, which I will use as a bullet, as ammunition for further rounds. Here I will stop and say that Heroes 4 is a better game. Heroes 4 succeeds at being a strategy game better than Gothic 3 tries to succeed at being an RPG. Heroes 4 wins here. Disco Elysium vs Alan Wake. An obvious choice. Disco Elysium. But while we are still here, I wanna say, Sam Lake, please stop this thing you are doing. Adding films, cinematic experience. You know, this pompous self-fellatio through re-evaluation what a video game is. Stop this, please. Yes, you are invited to Game Awards. Yes, you are given medals. Yes, you are praised. Yes, your trailers and game presentations receive applause. But no, we are fed up with this shit. We wanna play fucking video games, not experiences. We want to experience video games, not experience experiences. Please, start making video games again. I beg you, Sam Lake, please. Disco Elysium is obvious because it hits video game greatness dead center without trying to smuggle in film grammar to justify itself. It leans hard into writing, mood, philosophy, and it still stays game-alike. A role-playing system where choices, checks, failure states, character build, and internal reactivity are the engine. I'm not watching a character's mind, I'm playing it. It's an experience in the normal sense of the word, but it isn't trying to be a film, and it isn't ashamed of being interactive. Text, dialogue, and consequence aren't ornamental, they're mechanics. The writing doesn't arrive as a cutscene reward, it is the play. Alan Wake sits on the other pole of this argument. The whole self-conscious, heavily authored, meta-tingled presentation, the way the studio clearly wants admiration for the cinematic framing and the "we're blurring medium's" ambition, lands as a cultural performance more than a commitment to play. The thesis becomes, look, we are rethinking what a video game can be, and that's the part I'm fed up with. My demand stays simple. Start making video games again. Not virtual museum that leads you through a curated passive experience and keeps nudging you to admire how profound it is. Emotion, story, atmosphere, fine, but let meaning come from doing. Agency, friction, systems, consequences. Let interpretation and identity building be interactive. Despite often being called a visual novel, Disco Elysium is still far more a greater game than Alan Wake. Anyway, Disco Elysium. Settlers 5 vs Baldur's Gate 2 is one of those matchups where affection and judgment are very far apart. I genuinely like Settlers. It's nice, it's charming, it has beautiful music. Music I listen to outside the game. But its biggest downside is also its fatal flaw. It doesn't have artificial intelligence. And I don't mean that the AI is bad. No, I mean it literally does not exist. The AI opponents don't build bases, don't mine, don't collect resources. Their cities are already completed. Technologies are maxed. Fortifications done. The only thing happening is this invisible mechanism. I'm convinced it's a hidden looping timer that spawns an army and sends it towards your base. You kill it and then it goes again. That's not artificial intelligence, that's triggers. That's a map script saying every 60 seconds spawn army. For a strategy game, this is a sin, an unforgivable sin. A strategy game lives or dies on the idea that you and the opponent are playing the same game, under the same rules, reacting to each other. Once the opposition stops being a system and becomes a conveyor belt, the entire genre collapses into a circus. And yet, despite that, there's something the game does that genuinely impressed me. After every campaign mission, there's this ending sequence where the camera pans around the map, the people, the settlements, and the narrator tells you what your choices led to, the fate of the people there. Even if it's a tiny village of 3 goat fuckers, it's still strangely touching to hear how my actions change the lives of these otherwise insignificant spots on the map. I've never seen a strategy game do this. Most of them barely have endings at all, let alone narrative epilogues that aren't just statistics or medals. This is simple to execute, but the fact that they bothered makes a difference. It gives the map memory, it makes the conflict feel like it happened somewhere, to someone. Still, I'm not going to pretend that this saves it. On the other side is Baldur's Gate 2, a classic, and at that point the decision becomes very simple. I'm picking a strong and lasting classic RPG over a dysfunctional strategy game with some genuinely nice touching moments. Settlers V has charm, music and heart, but it fails at the foundational requirement of its genre. Baldur's Gate 2 succeeds so completely at what it sets out to be that it becomes part of the medium's backbone. Baldur's Gate 2. Mortal Kombat 9 vs The Sims 3 is a ridiculous matchup in the best way. They're not trying to do the same thing, they're not even built from the same instincts, and that's exactly why the contrast is so sharp. The Sims 3 wants to be a slow, sprawling toy box of routines, personalities and systems. Mortal Kombat 9 wants to be a tight, immediate machine that turns split-second decisions into either triumph or humiliation. One is about inhabiting life, the other is about winning a fight and looking cool as hell while doing it. The Sims 3 really is great. It's arguably the peak of that franchise's particular magic. The open world that makes the neighborhood feel like a living map instead of a set of separate boxes. But the real reason this game is special for me is a mechanical feature that is absent from all the other Sims games: the texture picker. It stops being a catalog for preset aesthetics and becomes a sandbox for taste, absurdity and experimentation. Brick texture pans, wood carpet, metal pillow. I've spent hours building houses and designing interiors in Sims 3 very much thanks to this feature. But if I am honest about how The Sims 3 feels once the novelty of its system settles, a lot of the gameplay becomes supervision. Some of it is hilarious, some of it is charming, but a lot of it is waiting. Waiting for needs to fill, waiting for work to end, waiting for the relationship bar to move. Mortal Kombat 9 is the opposite. There's no waiting, it's immediate confrontation itself. Spacing, reactions, reads, nerves, execution. You can feel your mistakes instantly. You can feel improvement instantly too. The feedback loop is brutally clean. When it clicks, it's one of the best sensations games can offer. So Sims 3 stays great, and it stays special, and it stays one of the best entries in the series. But Mortal Kombat 9 is a hell of a lot more fun, because it's concentrated entertainment, because its roster and costumes are peak Mortal Kombat energy. Mortal Kombat 9 is a better game. Planescape Torment vs Disco Elysium. It's like comparing Chinggis Khan to Napoleon. Not because one is bigger and one is smaller, or one is older and one is newer. You don't compare them by counting bodies or borders. You compare them by the shape of their ambition and what they changed afterward. If I'm trying to start somewhere concrete, then gameplay-wise, Planescape is more diverse and easily shakes off the accusation of being a visual novel, at which Disco Elysium fails. And yes, Planescape has a combat system, unlike Disco Elysium, but that's not really a strong upside, since I dislike it. I'm not a fan of combat systems with low player agency. Combat existing doesn't automatically make a game more game. Bad combat is not a bonus, it's a tax. Still, Planescape at least looks and behaves like a traditional classic RPG, moving through spaces, interacting with objects, solving quests with a wider range of verbs. Disco Elysium, by design, collapses most verbs into conversation, introspection and skill checks. If gameplay means multiple physical interactions with the world, Disco feels narrower even when it's mechanically dense. Both have cool vibe and aesthetics, but I must go with the dark fantasy rusted vibe of Planescape. Rusted is exactly it. Decay, age, the machinery of metaphysics. A world where the ideas have corroded into architecture. The planes feel like philosophy turned into metal and bone. I also don't feel any fondness for the item-based mechanics, where to progress you need to find some specific object, the search for which can disrupt the pacing of the game. And not even a plot critical item, but something like a hammer, a crowbar, a scrap of parchment, and so on. I know so many examples of people dropping games because of moments like these. But thanks to this, the game designers cleverly push the player to talk more and explore more of the game world. Yes, there is some tediousness, but again, you want to turn a blind eye to it because the writing here is on an incredible level. Unfortunately, Planescape is also a classic in the worst sense of the word. Yes, my friends, on the level of find a rope to get into the elevator shaft like in the first Fallout, often without really understanding what you're supposed to do or where to go. Old games sometimes play like you're supposed to read a game manual or a guide on the internet, but I didn't experience that many suffocating moments like this in game. Possibly because they were diluted with interesting dialogues and an enchanting world, its aesthetic, music and atmosphere. I will go with Planescape here, and I think even Disco Elysium fans will agree with me. It leaves a more lasting impact in its themes and questions that demand profound introspection. Besides, Disco Elysium feels like a postmodern work with jokes, memes and political commentary and social issues, while Planescape feels also like a classic in the best sense of the word. Not classic in the overused mainstream word, but classic like Iliad or Republic. Disco Elysium operates in a postmodern mode, self-aware, fragmented, ironic, densely referential, and openly engaged with temporary politics, humor, and meme-like cultural signals. Whereas Planescape feels classic in the older, philosophical, literal sense, meaning it aspires to timelessness, moral inquiry, and metaphysical seriousness. Planescape isn't conventional or dated. It treats identity, belief, and meaning with the gravity and universality of classical works. Planescape, for all its occasional classic in the worst sense mechanical nonsense, asks questions in a way that feels like a philosophical monument that just happens to be interactive. Planescape wins here. Torment Tides of Numenera vs Avowed is funny, because I dropped both games just a few hours in. So this isn't really me declaring with godlike certainty which one is better. It's me admitting exactly why I stopped playing each one, and being pretty ruthless about difference between my own failure and game's failure. With Torment, I didn't quit because the game betrayed me. I quit because I showed up unprepared. I didn't have the mindset for it. I wasn't ready to engage it. Isometric, text-heavy RPGs don't really do plug and play. That doesn't make the game lesser to me. If anything, the fact that it has a threshold is part of its identity. Avowed is the opposite situation. I dropped and refunded it because of the disgusting blur caused by Unreal Engine 5 and inability to disable temporal anti-aliasing. That kind of thing isn't a matter of taste or readiness. It's not me failing to meet the game. It's the game forcing a visual filter that makes it unpleasant to look at, and then refusing to give me the basic control to fix it. It's like trying to read a book through fogged glasses. You're not unprepared, you're blocked. A game can be slow, demanding, confusing, even hostile in the ways it asks for attention, and I can still respect it. But if it is actively uncomfortable to look at and won't let me correct it, it violates the baseline contract. So Torment wins. I still respect it. It's still in my game library. The reason I quit Avowed undercuts it at the level of basic experience, the level where I can't even get to the point of evaluating what's it trying to be, because I'm stuck staring through that disgusting blur. Witcher 3 vs Deus Ex. This is comparable to battle between Plato versus Aristotle. That comparison is sharper than I initially thought, so let me entertain it further. I'm not just saying two titans. I'm trying to explain why these two games feel great in fundamentally different registers, and why my choice isn't really about quality, so much as what kind of greatness I prefer. Witcher 3 is Plato, and Deus Ex is Aristotle. Witcher 3 is about epicness, narrative meaning, authored vision, myth, the crafted arc. It's the world as story. Even when I'm given choices, the experience is still shaped like a novel. Characters written to be loved and hated, scenes spaced to land emotional beats, quests that feel like short stories. The greatness is inseparable from the sensation that I'm inhabiting a deliberate literary vision. I'm carried. It's always, in some sense, guiding the feeling I'm meant to have. Melancholy, dread, tenderness, moral unease, and it's very good at it. Plato here isn't abstract philosophy, it's the idea that the highest truth of experience comes from form and meaning imposed by an author. Deus Ex is the other kind of truth. Systems, material causality, player agency, praxis. It's the world as mechanism. The point isn't that the story is absent. Deus Ex absolutely has themes and mood, but the way those themes land is rooted through what I do and what the world allows. Its greatness lives in the relationship between intent and systemic response. I'm not being carried through myth, I'm being given space where my decisions feel materially consequential, where my approach is a genuine expression of my thinking. If Witcher 3's choices often feel like I'm choosing which authored branch I want to see, Deus Ex choices feel like choosing how reality works around me. That's why player agency and praxis matter. Praxis is lived action, knowledge proven by doing. In a Deus Ex-shaped game, I don't just hold an opinion about a problem, I test it. I pick a route, a toolset, a method, and the game's systems validate or punish the method in a way that feels legible. The satisfaction isn't I witnessed a beautiful story, it's I solved a situation in a way that felt like mine. That's why Plato versus Aristotle metaphor is sharper than I initially thought. These games don't just differ by genre or production values. Witcher 3's truth is emotional and narrative. Deus Ex's truth is operational and systemic. The feeling that the world is intelligible and reactive, that my approach is a moral and practical stance at the same time. And I prefer Aristotle. Saying Deus Ex isn't a dismissal of Witcher at all. If anything, it's admitting Witcher 3 might be more universally moving, more polished, more novelistic giant. And yet, in the hierarchy of what feels most essentially a video game, Deus Ex represents the medium's unique power, turning philosophy into a playable system and making my method part of the meaning. Planescape Torment vs Cyberpunk. I could make two cheap moves here. I could say, we're picking games, so the better game here is Cyberpunk. That's true. Or I could say, the better RPG is Planescape, so I should pick Planescape and prove how sophisticated and refined my taste is. Also true. Both Cyberpunk and Planescape left an enormous impression on me. The art, the music, the writing, both of them hit extremely hard. The finale in both felt like quintessential closures of excellent narratives. There's also a more practical question I can't dodge. What would I actually want to reinstall and play right now? The honest answer is Cyberpunk. Not because of some boring, better graphics argument, or not because it's a bigger map, but because it feels incredible in my hands. The gunplay feels great, and the movement system is outstanding, especially once you gain the ability to double jump and dash. At that point, cars become optional. You can traverse Night City like a cyber ninja, leaping across rooftops, billboards and skyscrapers. Simply moving through the city is a fun in itself. It turns the open world into something playful instead of walking through cells. But I'm not going to pretend that's the whole story, because both games are immersive experiences that you don't just play, you feel them. The music in both is excellent. Planescape has a stronger soundtrack overall, but while Cyberpunk has fewer tracks that stood out for me, the ones that did were exceptional. The atmosphere in both is so thick it sticks to you. The closure in both is the kind that makes you sit there afterward and stare at the screen like a person who's just been told something important. And I strongly disagree with the idea that Cyberpunk is just some shallow, evil corporations narrative or a simplistic anti-capitalist fantasy. That's lazy. It's far more nuanced than that. First and foremost, Cyberpunk is a story about mortality. All the neon signs, advertisements, rain-soaked streets and flashy technology are surface aesthetics. Beneath that is a story about death and identity. It's about what it means to be a person when your body can be modified, your image can be curated, your past can be edited, and your future can be leased. It's the creeping sense that your I isn't as stable as you want it to be, and that the world would happily commodify whatever you thought was private and sacred. That's why the companions and romance and relationships don't feel like a side content to me. They answer the question that actually matters in that setting. Can genuine human intimacy be achieved in a seemingly fake world with all the obnoxious advertisements, fake implants and identities? The game isn't only technocratic horror, it is countered by human connection. And unlike Planescape, Cyberpunk also delivers exceptional gameplay on top of all that. Combat, stealth, parkour, driving, everything feels polished and fun. Many people will disagree with this. Others will say that the choice should be obvious because one is the real game and the other is a snooze fest that you enjoy by reading, not playing. I don't agree with that framing. Planescape is monumental, and I'm not going to reduce it to a meme just because it's text heavy. But if I'm forced to pick one, I'm picking one that plays better. And as for Cyberpunk's technical problems, I played on PC and they never mattered to me. The game worked fine at launch and in the years afterward. Console issues simply weren't part of my experience, and I'm not going to pretend they were just to align with the public narrative people argued about online. Cyberpunk wins. Deus Ex vs Heroes of Might and Magic 4. At last I finally get to go in depth on why this game, hated by so many, got so far. Far enough to face Deus Ex itself. I'm not going to pretend Heroes 4 is secretly the most elegant strategy game ever made, or that its mechanics somehow outshine the rest of the series. That's not the point. The point is the campaigns. The reason it survived this long isn't some misunderstood mechanic or a hidden competitive scene. It's that writing inside this thing is doing something most strategy games don't even attempt. The missions aren't just excuses for maps, they're chapters in a thematic work. I can give you 3 examples and you'll see immediately what I mean. I'm talking about campaigns that repeatedly stage philosophical and moral questions with a kind of deliberate, almost stubborn seriousness. Stories that treat fantasy as a vehicle for metaphysical unease, political realism and character interiority. First of all, what sets the Necromancer campaign apart is its rich, often philosophical narration, told entirely from protagonist's point of view. The player isn't tasked with global conquest or simplistic good versus evil battles. Instead, they guide a reluctant leader who wrestles with questions of morality, identity, and survival in a universe that seems indifferent at best and malicious at worst. Themes of moral ambiguity, political realism, and metaphysical inquiry are woven into every chapter. The story ultimately becomes about personal transformation. How a man shaped by death dares to live on his own terms, and how fragile even the coldest convictions can become in the presence of empathy, memory, and loss. The True Blade campaign is a tale of two intertwined paths: the visible arc of Lysander, the public hero, and the invisible one of Milton, the private soul. One saves a kingdom, the other reminds us what it means to give without being seen. The narrative richness lies in how the campaign elevates both without diminishing either. Lysander's trials are epic, symbolic, and spiritually transcendent. But it is Milton's quiet reflections on family, aging, duty, his unasked questions, and his ache for meaning that anchor the story in real emotion. Where Lysander becomes legend, Milton becomes memory. And in that quiet distinction, the True Blade campaign reveals that every great story rides on the shoulders of someone history forgets. Lastly, the Price of Peace campaign contends that immortality, stripped of impermanence and suffering, is sterile, devoid of urgency, meaning, and growth. The villain's tragedy lies not in villainy, but in exhaustion. Having lived too long, seen too much, he seeks to stop history itself, and in doing so extinguishes the very conditions that make life worth living. Mortality, by contrast, imbues the protagonist's every decision with significance. Her limited time, her vulnerability, and her failures do not disqualify her from greatness. They are its foundation. The story suggests that meaning arises not from power or perfection, but from the finite, fragile, and defiant nature of the human spirit. That's why Heroes 4 got this far. It's not a franchise killer for me. It's an ambitious alternative with campaigns that can be unusually deep, thematically bold, and emotionally resonant. On satisfactory gameplay, phenomenal music, and unforgettable narrative, it earns its place here. But alone, it still cannot eclipse Deus Ex. Because, in the end, Heroes 4 fails on delivery. It hands me the story and themes as a book, chunky blocks of text. That isn't me sneering at the writing. The writing is exactly why I'm defending it. But the philosophy mostly lives in the pages I read between missions, while the gameplay remains the gameplay. Deus Ex delivers the same kind of seriousness in more ways than one. It doesn't only tell me about power, surveillance, corruption, ideology, and moral ambiguity, it makes me operate inside those forces. The meaning arrives through systems and consequences, through choices and methods, through how I move, how I improvise, what I refuse, what I exploit. Heroes 4 excels at storytelling, but Deus Ex excels at video game storytelling. Video game storytelling differs because player agency turns narrative into a lived experience. Stories unfold not just through authored text or cutscenes, but through choices, interactions with NPCs, overheard dialogue, discovered clues, and environments that communicate meaning through exploration and consequence. This also means that very much of the storyline can and will be missed by the player, unless he is perceptive, curious, and exploring. And that's the point! So yes, this is the moment the run ends for Heroes 4. I can love what Heroes 4 is trying to do, I can respect how far it reaches, I can point to campaigns that feel like genuine thematic works. But when it meets a game that turns ideas into play instead of paragraphs, that book-like greatness becomes its Achilles heel. Deus Ex wins here. Deus Ex vs Cyberpunk. Again, a reminder to soften the landing. We are not picking the greatest RPG of all time, we are picking the greatest video game of all time. This isn't a genre purity contest. I'm not scoring the most immersive sim against the most revered classic like I'm doing Liturgy. I'm scoring the overall artifact. And here's the problem for Deus Ex. Cyberpunk doesn't merely win in its own lane, it beats both Deus Ex and Planescape on their strongest turfs. Deus Ex struggles where Planescape excels, while Planescape struggles where Deus Ex excels. Cyberpunk succeeds very well at both. The older giants split the crown between them. One gives you the hard, practical, systems-driven expressiveness, the feeling that meaning comes through agency and design, and the other gives you that dense, mythic, metaphysical writing, the sense you're inside a philosophical novel. Cyberpunk is the rare work that walks into that split and refuses it. It's not deep story with shallow play, and it's not great systems with serviceable narrative. It's an unusually complete package. I'll repeat what I've said earlier. Infantile opinion is thinking Deus Ex is very deep with its political insights and introspection, while Cyberpunk is just evil corporations. It's like saying Deus Ex is just evil Illuminati. Cyberpunk can keep up with political commentary, conspiracies, and questions about transhumanism just fine, and it doesn't stop there. It goes beyond, because the thing that keeps dragging back into the center is identity, intimacy, and human mortality. That's why this verdict sounds like blasphemy in the circles that treat Deus Ex like scripture. Deus Ex loses to Cyberpunk, casting rift in reality, volcano eruptions, and tectonic plates shattering. But I'm not doing it because I suddenly think Deus Ex is a lesser game or because I've forgotten what it did for the medium. I'm doing it because I don't think it's enough to be brilliant in one register anymore, not when something comes along that meaningfully competes on both fronts at once, and still finds room to be more emotionally intimate at the core. Cyberpunk wins again. Cyberpunk vs New Vegas. This could have been the finale, but sadly we have to wrestle these giants now. The easy way is to pick a better RPG. Better in quest variety, character build expressiveness, companions, side quests, and how much of the narrative can be shaped by the player. And go with New Vegas. Which I am ultimately going to do, but not just yet. What people miss when they praise New Vegas is that they talk about wasteland politics, like the intellectual core is just faction ideology. NCR versus Legion, House versus Yes Man, democracy versus authoritarianism, technocracy versus anarchic independence. Political science cosplay debate boiling down to yay democracy or yay fascism. That's where a lot of players burn most of their intellectual resource. New Vegas isn't deep because it simulates post-apocalyptic politics. It's deep because it stages a moral trial about power, gratitude, history, and identity. The factions aren't reducible to slogans or policy bundles. Each faction demands the demotion of competing claims: gratitude, autonomy, universality, mercy. And that's the real mechanism. New Vegas keeps forcing the ugly recognition that moral life isn't maximize good outcomes. It's deciding which values are allowed to be overridden and which are sacred. The game doesn't just let me say I value these things. That's why the factions are mutually exclusive in a deeper sense. Not because their policies conflict, but because their ethics conflict. Power is obvious, but it's not just who should rule, it's what power does to a moral language, how it turns ideals into tools, how it rationalizes cruelty, how it tempts me to confuse necessary with permitted. This is just the surface of what intellectual food can be extracted from New Vegas. It's one of those games that can be read endlessly, like a moral laboratory, because it doesn't merely tell me about ethical conflict. It makes me author it through choice architectures that are unusually expressive. Cyberpunk can be profound and emotionally haunting, but New Vegas turns decisions into something closer to a sustained philosophical autobiography. New Vegas wins here. Red Dead Redemption 2 vs Baldur's Gate 3. These games are comparable in scale, obsessive attention to detail, emotional weight, and production confidence. If someone called either one of the greatest video games ever made, I wouldn't roll my eyes. Red Dead Redemption 2 has an Achilles heel that keeps And it comes down to the same pressure point I keep returning to: player agency versus authored control. There's no denial that Red Dead Redemption 2 is extraordinary. Its emotional register is immense. Arthur Morgan's story, the sense of fading time, the slow suffocation of inevitability. The emotions aren't cheap, they're earned through duration, repetition, and atmosphere. But that same literary precision is also the source of its limitation. Outside of free roam, Red Dead Redemption 2 becomes rigid. Missions aren't spaces to be solved, they're scenes to be performed. Rockstar's approach is cinematic absolutism. Stand here, approach from this angle, shoot these enemies in this order, protect this NPC at this exact moment. Deviate even slightly and the game snaps back with a failure screen. There are hundreds of them. You left mission boundaries, you let your companion die, Micah got away, you spooked the deer. That isn't nitpicking. That's evidence of a view that there is only one correct way to be Arthur Morgan in a given situation. The 100% mission completion requirements only enforce this. Red Dead Redemption 2 trusts me emotionally, but not procedurally. I'm trusted to feel the right things, but not to act in unexpected ways. Meaning is authored first, and my role is to inhabit it faithfully. That's why the emotions land so hard. The experience is tightly controlled, paced and framed like a novel or a prestige television. But it also means I am aligned around the game, rather than the game align itself around me. This is where Baldur's Gate 3 is more successful. It prioritizes player agency, and it doesn't just say that, it builds everything around it. It's the sacralization of player agency as a structural principle. The game doesn't ask how to make me experience a story. It asks what happens if I do this, and then it tries, obsessively, to answer. Quests aren't scripts, they're problem spaces. Major plot characters can die early, betray me, be ignored, be manipulated, be redeemed or be corrupted. Entire arcs can collapse or transform without triggering "you failed" screen. The distinction is simple and brutal. Red Dead Redemption 2 treats deviation as error. Baldur's Gate 3 treats deviation as authorship. That doesn't mean Baldur's Gate 3 lacks emotion. Far from it. The emotions hit just as hard, but they're emergent. They come from consequences I didn't anticipate, outcomes I feel responsible for, moments where I realize the game let me go somewhere it didn't have to. When something tragic happens in Baldur's Gate 3, it feels like my tragedy, not one I was guided into with velvet robes. So this isn't a dismissal of Red Dead Redemption's 2 power. The point is that when both games succeed emotionally, the deciding factor becomes whether the game lets me own that emotion through action. Red Dead Redemption 2 is an extraordinary authored experience. Baldur's Gate 3 is an extraordinarily collaborative one. Olympus is reserved for games that fully embrace what video games uniquely are, systems that respond to human intention. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a masterful tragedy I inhabit. Baldur's Gate 3 is a moral and narrative universe I help create. And in this bracket, that's ultimately about the greatest video game, not the greatest story or the most beautiful world. The game that places player agency at the center, treating it as sacred rather than inconvenient. For this reason, Baldur's Gate 3 wins. And this was my final choice. Baldur's Gate 3 vs New Vegas. Both games respect player agency. Both qualify as RPGs in the broadest sense of the word. Both deliver gameplay excellence. Funnily enough, both have been called a snooze fest by their haters, and that insult almost works as a purity test. If a game gets dismissed by people who need immediate dopamine to stay alive, it's probably doing something deeper than simply stimulation. New Vegas gets hated by action kids who love Fallout 4 and confuse responsiveness with richness, forgiving simplification because it feels too good to shoot. Baldur's Gate 3 gets hated by Witcher fans who want immediate action, not wait 50 turns looking at every goblin to take its turn. Then there's the gamer fossils, who think an RPG is Planescape and Disco Elysium, and everything else is a perversion. Both finalists get attacked from multiple directions because neither optimizes itself for one audience's comfort. Both are ultimate video games, something the medium must strive for and hold as ideal. Games that are games, stories that are not trivial, companions that are not hirelings or disposable units, quests that have varieties, roleplay that allows both noble hero and despicable monster. Both have enjoyable gameplay that delivers satisfactory action. In two areas, I can edge closer to Baldur's Gate 3. First, the music. Borislav Slavov delivered a consistently spectacular soundtrack, while Inon Zur had high highs but also low lows. Baldur's Gate 3 is the best soundtrack Borislav composed. New Vegas is not Inon Zur at his best. There's a coherence to Baldur's Gate's score, a sense of single identity carried across chaos, while New Vegas is more uneven, brilliant in moments, merely functional in others. Second, finality of the product. New Vegas was rushed, cut and had potential to be more. Baldur's Gate 3 is more final, closer to what it wanted to be, landed with fewer missing organs. I can feel the bite marks of budget and time on New Vegas in a way Baldur's Gate 3 rarely forces me to. But completeness is a virtue, not the highest one, and I'm not going to let more final automatically crown greatest. Closure is where things get interesting, because New Vegas excels in closure. After the final battle, the game gives me a long recap. Not a statistics sheet, not enemies killed number. It shows how I changed the wasteland and touched the lives of people I've met. Some may think that a simple slideshow is lame or outdated, but it perfectly succeeds its function, delivering ultimate closure with specificity and weight instead of spectacle. Baldur's Gate 3 has amazing epilogues too, and it earns that praise. It can wrap both villain and hero paths with real care, and it lets consequences breathe even when moral trajectories diverge wildly. But Baldur's Gate's greatness concentrates itself in a particular register. It is deep in the domain of identity and personal becoming. Dark Urge puts the question in the cleanest, sharpest form. Defy your nature and destiny or become what you were meant to be. Gale makes it ambition versus acceptance. Astarion becomes a trial about metamorphosis of spirit and the meaning of freedom after trauma. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't just give me characters with problems, it gives me dilemmas that feel metaphysical without needing to lecture me. Still, New Vegas excels in philosophy, and not as decoration, not as vibe, not as couple of big choices saved for the finale. New Vegas raises questions on governance, legitimacy, and institutions. New Vegas raises questions on identity, human nature, determinism, and fatalism. New Vegas raises questions on religion, penance, and sin. New Vegas raises questions on the inability to let go of the past. New Vegas raises questions on humans using history to shape present, and resurrecting, changing, and perverting symbols of old. And it doesn't just raise them like a checklist, it entertains them, like a professor leading a philosophy seminar, ultimately letting me do the internalizing and digesting myself. That's the decisive difference. Baldur's Gate 3 tends to hit philosophy through people, through intimate arcs and climactic turns. So the questions arrive as dilemmas inside particular lives. New Vegas spreads philosophy across the entire world as an operating system. Factions are not just ideological skins, they are moral psychologies. Side quests are not errands, they're case studies. Lastly, Baldur's Gate 3 is also an example that has elements I have articulated in my critique of Pathfinder. Still, the game is much better at integrating these elements than other titles like Dragon Age Veilguard. The game even acknowledges this explicitly.
Who agrees you're a queer kind of witch? But this city is a queer place. And Minsk, you may have noticed, is sometimes strange himself.
Ultimately, the game succeeds at maintaining my immersion, despite being a clear product of its time. Despite not having sexy baddies, like Baldur's Gate 3 does, a better, more immersive RPG with a stronger philosophical and narrative sandbox wins here. New Vegas is the greatest video game of all time.